Okay, welcome back to the next little piece. Okay, a couple of more things that I want to cover. Somebody did mention this at the beginning of the course, and I said, ignore this for right now. We don't really need it, so time finally to actually cover it. So obviously, this is not one of these super critical things, but depending on who you end up taking courses from later, you may end up seeing a heavy amount of use of this. Okay, so very simple. Let's have this variable here called x. We'll set it equal to 45. Okay, and we'll do a console.log the value of x. All right, then we'll say x is equal to 34, and I'll do a console.log x. And of course, what do we expect to see? Okay, well, first of all, here, let me remind you, can I say this? Okay, well, let's get over to here and let's load this one up. And no, we can't because X has already been declared. The problem it says is on line 27. Sorry, back to here. And of course, the thing is that you can't declare the same variable twice within the same scope. So because this is out in the global scope, I've got a problem. If I put it inside a function, I would have the same problem. But of course, there's no reason why I can't do this. So first of all, I make X equal to something and then later I change it. And of course, well, first of all, let's see, back over to here. Okay, so first of all, it ends up being 45, then ends up being 34. And of course, this is allowed because, well, x is called a variable. Why do they call it a variable? Well, because it can vary over time. Okay, so that's fine. This is a variable. This is the same thing that we've used throughout all of the other programming languages. Now, one of the students asked me, I think maybe it was about week number 2 or so, saying, oh, last semester when we took this course, the instructor kept sticking the word const in front of everything rather than the word let. Okay, well, so first of all, let me explain what this is. Okay, so the word const is an abbreviation for constant. Okay, so what I've done is I've created this thing called x, and I've set it equal to the number 45, and I have marked it as constant. Okay, so far absolutely no difference. The only difference is later when I come down here on line 27 and I try to change its value, you'll say that you get back an error saying assignment to a constant variable. So what this is it's a variable, but it's being marked basically as read only. So you can use it as many times as you want, but you can't change the actual value. Okay, so is that important? Well, that can be important for certain types of problems. Does it absolutely a must that you use it? And the answer is no, you don't need it because obviously everything can just be a variable and you can just avoid setting it later. Again, it's the same type of thing that I said before. The reason why you do things a lot of times in programming is to protect yourself from other programmers. Okay, and remember that the other programmer may be you. Okay, so you see, by marking something as being constant, it just means that later we can sort of guarantee that it's not going to be modified. Okay, so sometimes you'll find people you use this a lot. Sometimes people declare everything as being constant and will only change this to the word let if they're actually reusing it. Most of the time you probably don't find me using the word const very much, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have use. It's just, in a lot of the examples that we've used here, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But what I want to do is I want to use this thing up here because I want to point out something about the word const. Let's have this customer C be a new customer. Okay, let's pass in an ID number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and, well, this is me. Okay, and let's do a console.log C. All right, and of course, well, look at this. That's nothing surprising. And, well, since we're here, can we just go and change the name of C to U? Okay, and will this end up working? Okay, console.log. Now, of course, we just went through this in the previous video. Yeah, this is absolutely no problem because, well, that's just a public attribute, so there's nobody stopping you. Okay, but you might say, well, you know what I could maybe do instead of having to go through the process of making these private variables, could I just use the word const? Okay, would that save me from actually making the change? Okay, here, let's actually change the spelling of this one so you know it actually did happen. Hey, look, it didn't actually work. We attempted to stop everything from happening, but it just ended up happening anyway. Okay, just because you mark a variable as const doesn't mean that you can't change what's inside it. But what it does allow you to prevent you from doing is, if I tried to say C is equal to customer 33333 U, okay, put this one back. This type of thing, that is actually going to be stopped. Okay, so it means that you can't actually change the variable called C. You can change what's inside C, but you can't change the actual variable C. Now, if this was a simple string or a number, guess what? Now it's completely locked down. There wouldn't be anything that you'd be able to do with it. Okay, but at least for right now, you can see that this constant does have a bit of a limitation. So it allows you to make constant variables, or variables that cannot be reassigned, but that doesn't mean that you can't keep the value from actually changing. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to cover, so put that away. Again, you may find some people will use const a lot, and you've probably noticed that I tend not to use it very often. Okay, because I just haven't seen any purpose for it in this course. All right, so the other thing I want to cover in here before I stop this video is I want to cover something. You may have spotted this in the credit card processing lab. Okay, because I know at least one student did ask me what was this word for and why was it here. So I explained, and I said, well, you don't really need to know about it for this time, but now what I will do is I will explain it. Okay, take a look at this. Up here, I've created this little database called a customer list, and I'm just going to console.log everything. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to put another one right here. Customer db2 is new customer list, and I will also console.log db2. Okay, and of course what happens, sorry, I forgot the word lit. Okay, here we go. And of course what happens is I end up with two of these customer databases. Now this is kind of a little bit dangerous, because if you end up with two customer databases, it means that all of the customer information inside the list ends up being duplicated, which I think is kind of not that great of an idea. In fact, usually what I end up seeing happening is I will often see students write functions that do something like this, like save data. And what I'll end up seeing is I'll see db is equal to new customer list. And you can imagine that this was a function that they attached to a button. So every time they click on the save, it would create a new customer list. Well, you know what? This is actually not a good idea, because every time you create a new customer list, it goes through and creates a whole bunch of new customers. That's kind of silly, because really what I want is I want you just to use the database and not to keep creating it over and over again. Okay, and this was a trick that I ended up using in order to prevent this from happening. Well, remember, in order to create a customer list, it means that you must have gone through this constructor. So I decided what to do was, why don't we have an extra variable out here, a global variable called dbCount, which I'm going to start off as being equal to 0. And in here, I'm going to say if dbCount is exactly equal to 0, okay, well, actually, you know what I'm going to do is, let me put it this way. Let me say if dbCount is bigger than 0, what we're going to do is I'm going to actually stop it at this point. So I'm going to throw, you cannot create another one of these objects. Okay, I don't need to do anything else. But as soon as I get past here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do dbCount plus plus. So what's going to happen is the first time this gets called, dbCount will go from 0 to 1, and then the next time it won't actually go through this, it'll actually throw the exception. So the result is I will end up getting one db object created, but not the second db. So in other words, if I was to do something like this, okay, we'll make this so it's possible. Okay, let me comment this one out, and it'll simply call it the first time. Okay, so load it up. You can see that this works. But if I try making a second attempt to create one of these, it actually complains and says you cannot create another one of these objects because I've already got one. Okay, so that was the trick that I put into the credit card processing system, just to make sure that you couldn't create two of those credit card processors. And the answer is no, not to go in and remove the if statement and the throw. No, it's actually to change your logic. You, as the other programmer, meaning students, I tried to force you so that you could actually go and do the correct thing, which was to create that customer list just once. Okay, so that's actually the correct solution, not to get rid of the if statement. The if statement was put in place so that you didn't actually call this twice. Now, this is fine, except notice this db count is just out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so unfortunately, what could end up happening is there's nothing stopping me from going to db count, db count, and simply making that equal to 0. And of course, take a look what happens. Well, now I get to create it a second time. What happened to the first set of customers? Well, they all got thrown out and then recreated again. It's just a waste of time, waste of CPU resources. So instead of doing this, what I want to do is, it would be really nice if I could take this and I could put it inside. Okay, but of course the problem is you can't just have a db count right here, because now every customer list has their own db count, so I can't keep track of this. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a static db count, and I'm going to be asking about the static db count. So what this is a variable that's shared between everything. It's basically a global variable, but it lives inside the customer list. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to customer list.db count, and down here I'm going to say customer list.db count plus plus. And well, now I don't have this thing called db count anymore, and at least I'm back as what I was a few seconds ago. Db count. Okay, here we go, and load the page. Okay, and what is this? Is it now complaining about? It's complaining about this data count. Oh, do you know what? It's because this whole thing needs to be initialized to something. Okay, so remember that if you don't say it, it ends up being initialized to undefined, and that's why it couldn't do. Okay, so that is exactly the same as what I did before, except now at least db count is inside the customer list. Okay, again, can I just go to db count and ask for db count and make it equal to 0 so I can create it twice? And no, it doesn't allow that. That's because db count actually does not have anything built in, or sorry, db does not have something called db count. It's because it's a static variable. But what I could do is I could call it the customer list db count, because that's the way how you access static variables. And well, look at that. Now it allows me to go through again. Okay, so can I be a little bit more forceful and maybe make it a private variable? Okay, well, let's give it a try. Now, of course, once I make it private, well, I should have a problem here. And well, it says you can't do this on line 33 because it's now private, and you cannot create another one of these objects. But if I don't try to create two of the objects, you see everything is fine. Okay, so that's all that the word static is used for. Static is kind of like having a global variable, except that it's a global variable that lives inside a class. Okay, just like a static function. And of course, the reason why you want to do this, well, if you want to take this, you can now take your entire class, you can copy and paste it to use it anywhere else, and everything is self-contained, including this db count. So you don't have to worry about this extra variable sort of living around the outside. Okay, and again, is this absolutely necessary? No. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to put one of these onto the final assessment next week. But that doesn't mean that you won't see it. I just won't ask you to work with it. I may put it in to protect you from yourself, but that doesn't mean that you actually have to go in and do any work with it. Okay. All right. So that's it for this variable. For this video. I'll be back again with one more video to deal with some DOM manipulation functions next. Okay. See ya.